Imagine that you've just been given the most beautiful, slick, shiny red Ferrari. This thing was seriously cool, and it had the latest engine, body design, transmission. It was super quick, and everything about this was perfect, except one thing. It was missing wheels. Now what do you have? You really have a big hunk of shiny metal sitting in your garage. It's not really going to go anywhere. Now, unless the car has every necessary component that's needed for it to drive, it's not going to be worth a whole lot. I mean, if you just take away the engine, you've got nothing. If you just take away the transmission, you've got nothing. It's not going to be a functioning car without every component. We live in a world where there is more access to information than ever before. Generations, young and old, are being exposed to radically different ideologies and opinions every day. It can be so overwhelming trying to decipher what's true and what's false. But there is a way. Join me as we discuss some of the toughest questions out there about Christianity, the Bible, and culture. I'm your host, Nick Lackey. Welcome to the Garrison. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Garrison. I believe, what episode are we on now? Like 38, 39? I don't know. This is the start of the year, so hope your year's off to a good start. We are leading on from last episode, released on New Year's Day, which was about the cosmological argument, which argued that everything which begins to exist must have a cause, and then the universe began to exist, therefore the universe must have had a cause. But now we're going to be talking about what's called the teleological argument. The teleological argument. This argument talks about the argument for a designer, and we're going to get straight into it today. This might be a shorter episode, but it's going to be short and packed full of what I believe to be good information, which can help us understand the universe. So the teleological argument goes like this. In a similar format to the cosmological argument, we have two premises and then a conclusion. The first premise, whatever is designed has a designer. Number two, the second premise, the universe was designed. Number three, the conclusion, therefore the universe has a designer. Again, this is a simple deductive argument. This means the conclusion must be true if the premises are true. And the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines teleo or teleological as exhibiting or relating to design or purpose, especially in nature. So we are making an argument for a designer of the universe from the design or purpose that we see in nature. So again, let's examine whether the premises are true. Premise 1 and 2. Diving into it. Number 1. Whatever is designed has a designer. In September last year, I was fortunate enough to travel to the UK on a plane. Now, as I was traveling, we stopped over in Singapore first, and when we were flying into Singapore, I looked out my window and I came across a site. Now, instantly, the first thing I thought was, man, I'm going to take a picture of that because one day I'm going to use it in a podcast or a talk. And sure enough, here I am using it. But the reason is, after looking at probably hundreds of kilometers of kind of bush and water, kind of like jungly type stuff. Is jungly a word? I don't know. Something stuck out about this particular section of water and bush. And I'm not going to be able to show that to you if you're listening on podcast, but I'll describe it to you. It was like a grid. And in this grid, it looked like just bodies of water. And picture a grid of muddy looking water. You could see that it had been formed. I wish I could show you guys the picture. Maybe if you're watching on YouTube, I'll show you the picture. Otherwise, just imagine a grid of water. Although the section of bush and water is still only those two things, bush and water, the thing that separated it from the rest of the scenery was the appearance of order. From what I could see, there was a pattern that would not have formed had it been left up to random chance or the natural laws going on in this jungle. Now, if someone came up to me and they said, oh, Nick, that's just the great grid of randomness which got formed last month during the earthquake here, or that pattern was caused by the flooding last night, I would have looked at them a little strangely, and you probably would have too. If anyone tries to explain to me that it wasn't due to the design of some intelligent mind, I wouldn't believe them. When something gives the appearance of design, the most logical conclusion is that there was an intelligent mind behind it. This is another axiom, and we talked about axioms in the last episode, and an axiom is a self-evident truth. Even a child knows the difference between something like the Mona Lisa and splatter painting. Splatter painting is random. We just chuck stuff and end up with a painting. But the Mona Lisa, if you had told me, oh, that was just a splatter paint, someone just dropped a tin of paint and it ended up like that. No, when it appears to be designed, we can conclude that there was a designer. I mean, we all know the difference between a carefully crafted mansion and a pile of sticks and concrete. One of them is designed and the other one was not. I'll give you another example. Imagine for a second that I gave you a book, a simple kid's book with some simple pictures and some simple sentences. Now, if I told you that that book, it actually formed over millions of years. Basically, when the universe began, there was a tree which fell over, and then who knows how the tree got there anyway, that's not important. The tree got there, and some animal came and sliced off a sheet of that tree, which caused some paper to form, and then it fell into a body of water, and there's maybe some octopus ink landed on the page and colored it and dyed it, and then we just randomly got some sort of assortment of pictures which appeared to resemble true things, and then we had some letters which kind of formed from some accidental rain that landed. Okay, I don't know where I'm going with this, because it's just illogical that a book would form like that from random chance. The point I'm making is we all know that a book, even as simple as a little children's book with maybe one sentence per page and some simple pictures, would not have formed by itself. Because it's got the appearance of design, we can conclude that it was therefore designed. So premise one, everything which was designed has a designer, which leads us on to premise number 2. The universe was designed. Do we have evidence for that? Can that claim actually be backed up? The universe was designed? Well, we're going to look at a few different things here, and we're going to talk about evolution, which is going to be fun. But number 1, the first thing that we're going to talk about is what's called anthropic principles. Anthropic principles it's looking at the fine-tuning of the universe and arguing that in order for there to have been life, things had to be so specific in this universe. It seems to have been finely tuned. So I'm going to look at a few of them here. The first one, this is how Ray Comfort puts it. He says, the sun is 150 million kilometers away from us, and it's just the right distance from Earth to ripen our tomatoes. If we were 1% closer to the sun, life wouldn't be possible. Oh, that's pretty convenient. Thanks, random universe. Another one, if the initial explosion of the Big Bang had differed in strength by as little as 1 part in 10 to the power of 60, which is 1 with 60 zeros after it, the universe would have either quickly collapsed back on itself or expanded too rapidly for stars to form. In either case, life would be impossible. Or, as John Jefferson Davis points out, an accuracy of 1 part in 10 to the power of 60 can be compared to firing a bullet at a 1-inch target on the other side of the observable universe 20 billion light years away and hitting the target. Once again, man, aren't we just so lucky that this random universe just happened to have the right expansion rate? Otherwise, we wouldn't all be here. Another one, calculations by Brandon Carter show that if gravity had been stronger or weaker by 1 part in 10 to the power of 40, man, another big number there, then life-sustaining stars like the sun could not exist, and this would most likely make life impossible. That's another pretty specific thing which has gone on. Or if the moon was moved closer to Earth by just a fifth, the tides would be so enormous that twice a day they would reach 35 to 50 foot high over most of the surface of the Earth. That's quite convenient that we didn't end up like that. Another finely tuned constant is the strong nuclear force, which is the force that holds atoms together. Now, the sun burns by fusing hydrogen and higher elements together. When the 2 hydrogen atoms fuse, 0.7% of the mass of the hydrogen is converted into energy. If the amount of matter converted were slightly different, or was slightly smaller, 0.6% instead of 0.7, a proton could not bond to a neutron, and the universe would consist only of hydrogen. With no heavy elements, there would be no rocky planets and therefore no life. If the amount of matter converted were slightly larger, we went up to 0.8% instead, fusion would happen so readily and rapidly that no hydrogen would have survived from the Big Bang. Again, there would be no solar systems and no life. The number must lie exactly between 0.6% and 0.8%. Wow. That's pretty finely tuned for complete randomness, if that's what you believe. Oxygen comprises 21% of the atmosphere. If it were at 25%, fires would erupt spontaneously. And if at 15%, we would all suffocate. I'm grateful that it's at 21%. CO2 levels are just right. Any higher and a greenhouse effect would happen and we would all burn up. Any lower and plants wouldn't grow and again would all suffocate. If Jupiter wasn't in its current orbit, we would be bombarded by constant space material. It acts as a bit of a cosmic vacuum cleaner that sucks away all the space material. There are so many different constants and so many different things about our universe that are just finely tuned, just to the point where if it was any different, by the slightest of margins, life would not be possible. Astrophysicist Hugh Ross has calculated that the probability that these and other constants, which are about 122 of them in all, we only talked about 6 or 7 there, he said that the probability that these and the other constants would exist today for any planet in the universe by chance, for example, without divine design, assuming that there were 10 to the power of 22 planets in the universe, which is one with 22 zeros following it, his answer is shocking. There is one chance in 10 to the power of 138. That's one chance in 1 with 138 zeros after it. I mean, there are only 10 to the power of 70 atoms in the entire universe. In effect, there is zero chance that any planet in the universe would have the life-supporting conditions that we have, unless there is an intelligent designer behind it all. These anthropic principles, the evidence goes to show that there most likely was a designer of the universe. And I would argue it takes a whole lot more faith to believe that we all came here from random chance than it does to believe that there was actually a designer behind it all. Now, another thing we're going to look at now is DNA, or humans. We know the universe appears to be designed, but what about us? Well, did you know that in each one of your 37 trillion cells, there is a software program that's 3.5 billion letters long? Now, what do I mean by software program? Well, Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, he said DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. David Attenborough calls it the book of life, and scientists commonly refer to it as the instruction book for life, because every time your body has to create something new, it refers to the instruction book, your DNA, and your DNA tells it how to create maybe a new bit of hair, or to how to heal that wound, or how to grow that muscle. Obviously, my DNA hasn't quite told my body how to make a really bushy, nice looking beard on my face, but hopefully one day that changes. Now, DNA has a structure which looks like a twisted ladder, and these ladders, it's kind of made up of, I'll keep it simple, DNA is made up of A, T, C, and G, which is adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. And that's the letters A, T, C, and G. And scientists will call this the genetic alphabet. Okay? Now, if you've ever seen the movie Blade Runner 2049, there's a scene in it in which the main character, played by Ryan Gosling, he says he's referred to as Officer K. Now, Officer K, he's looking into a computer, looking for a DNA match. So he's running through a whole lot of these, you can see on the screen, A, T, C, and G. And then Joy, who is his kind of robot girlfriend, it's a weird movie, I wouldn't recommend, she says, data makes the man, looking at this A, T, C, and G. And she actually says A, and C, and T, and G. The alphabet of you, all from 4 symbols. I am only 2, 1 and 0. You see, she is a robot made up of computer code, 1s and 0s, and we, or she is referring to the human life here, is made up of A, C, T, and G. You can see here she's making a comparison. They're not actually that different. But no one in their right mind would look at a computer robot and think, oh, came from nothing, or randomness. No, that was clearly designed, and in the same way our DNA appears to be designed. It's ordered information. Natural laws of physics does not just produce ordered information. Well, what do I mean? Well, if a bomb goes off, it doesn't just arrange all of its debris into ordered information. What about evolution here? Actually, before we get to evolution, I want to talk about, really quickly, a quote from the co-discoverer of DNA. His name was Francis Crick, and he discovered DNA along with someone else. And he said, biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. Forgive me for butchering that. Philip Johnston, who's a law professor at UC Berkeley, replied, Darwinian biologists must keep repeating that reminder to themselves because otherwise they might become conscious of the reality that is staring them in the face and trying to get their attention. You see, Francis Crick, he saw that DNA appeared to be designed, but he's telling everyone, look, keep in mind it's not designed as you see it. Otherwise, you're going to start believing that it was designed. But it's such an obvious thing. There's a reason DNA appears to be designed, because it was. Okay, I did promise we're going to talk about evolution, so we will get to that now. What about evolution? Why don't we tackle this question while we're here? When someone asks the question to me, do you believe in evolution? Here's what I say. I say, what do you mean by evolution? Because there's actually two types of evolution. There's microevolution and macroevolution. And according to the University of Berkeley, this is what they say. Microevolution happens on a small scale within a single population, while macroevolution happens on a scale that transcends the boundaries of a single species. Now, as a Christian, microevolution is true, and it has been proven with empirical evidence. We can see this. For example, there might be a bird, and through a random mutation, which is scientifically proven, and Christians shouldn't have any problem with this, through a random mutation, maybe the bird's beak becomes longer, and then the birds which have longer beaks, they can reach food better, and so they survive, whereas the ones with short beaks, they can't reach food as well as the birds with long beaks, and so they die out. This is what's called natural selection, or survival of the fittest. And this stuff is actually true. There is scientific evidence to back it up. We believe in microevolution. Now, Christians, there's no problem with this. I mean, how do we get all the different species that we have today from the animals which were on the ark? I think microevolution doesn't just not contradict the Bible, it actually supports the Bible. Going back to that ark example, the Bible talks about having two of every kind of animal. And if we only had every kind, for example, a feline and a canine, then only through microevolution would we get the species that we have today. So that actually supports the Bible. The problem is when we get to macroevolution, a change in kind. For example, feline to canine, or fish to monkey, or tiny little bacteria from first life to human, or even more extreme, stardust to human, because that's what some people believe, like Neil deGrasse Tyson. There's no observable evidence for macroevolution, and it just does not make sense. There's another thing which goes to show that there's a problem with macroevolution, and this is called irreducible complexity. Imagine that you've just been given the most beautiful, slick, shiny red Ferrari. This thing was seriously cool, and it had the latest engine, body design, transmission. It was super quick, and everything about this was perfect, except one thing. It was missing wheels. Now what do you have? You really have a big hunk of shiny metal sitting in your garage. It's not really going to go anywhere. Now, unless the car has every necessary component that's needed for it to drive, it's not going to be worth a whole lot. I mean, if you just take away the engine, you've got nothing. If you just take away the transmission, you've got nothing. It's not going to be a functioning car without every component. And the same thing is true of our bodies. In fact, let me make this really, really, really simple, okay? Within our circulatory system, there are three main players involved. We've got blood, veins, and heart. Now, what would happen if we took away just one of these parts? If we took away blood, what would be the purpose of our heart and our veins? Or if we took away the heart, what would be the thing which causes the blood to pump through all the veins? Or if we took away the veins, then where's the blood going to go? Even if we just remove one part from this is very simplified here, we would no longer have a circulatory system. Or what about our eyes? Our eyes are so complex and there's many parts which make them up. Yet if we removed just one of them, our eyes would no longer function. And so really, if we believe in macroevolution, then answer this question. What evolved first in terms of our circulatory system? Was it our heart which randomly mutated? Well, why did the random mutation of the heart stay around if there was no blood and veins to go along with it? Or was it blood that randomly mutated first? Well, what was the purpose of having blood if there was no heart to pump it around? It just doesn't really make sense. In fact, Charles Darwin, the founder of this macroevolutionary belief, he says, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. And I think now we have seen by looking at organs within our body and complex systems in our body that they cannot have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, and I think his theory has broken down. That's the man himself, Charles Darwin, saying that. So, going back to our teleological argument, we've just kind of, well, it's related, but kind of sidetracked on evolution there. Therefore, the universe has a designer. We know that everything which is designed has a designer, and we know that the universe was designed, both looking at anthropic principles and looking at our own bodies, looking at DNA. Now, why don't scientists conclude that it was designed then? Well, to say that scientists conclude that it wasn't designed is not true at all. There are plenty of scientists who are Christians who believe this. It just seems to be that the popular narrative is that we came from macroevolution, but there are thousands of scientists, Christian scientists, who do believe that the universe was designed. In fact, science doesn't say anything about anything. Scientists make claims, and there are scientists which have different views on this. This is very important to remember. But for the scientists which rule out the existence of God or an intelligent designer before they look at the evidence, what's going to happen? Well, naturally, they're going to draw their conclusions before the evidence. If I assume before I come to look at the evidence that God cannot be the answer, then my conclusion cannot include God. Even if all the evidence points towards an intelligent designer, if I've ruled that out as an option, then I'm not going to reach that conclusion. It's called a presupposition. You suppose an answer to be true before you actually get to the answer. And in this case, people assume that the answer must be naturalistic, therefore, you're never going to see design. And as mentioned before, this is probably what Francis Crick did. He said biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. He made a presupposition that it cannot have been designed. Now, why do people rule out this obvious answer? Well, they don't want there to be one. And we talked about this in the last episode as well. They suppress the truth in their wickedness or in their unrighteousness. People don't want this to be true, that there is a God. Because if there is a God, then there is a moral standard. And if there is a moral standard, God is going to judge us by this moral standard. And our conscience accuses us, saying, we haven't lived up to this moral standard. And ultimately, the only answer here is to trust in Christ and what He did for us on the cross. So as I did in the last episode, what would I use on the street? What's the kind of main takeaway? If you can't remember every single point I've just mentioned, well, I would talk about how every bit of intelligent information has to come from an intelligent author. And books, using an example of a book like I did, is a great thing to use. And you can talk about how our DNA is ordered information, and people call it the instruction book for life. They refer to it as a book or a computer program. Now, in the discussion about evolution, I think it's really important we define the difference between micro and macro evolution. Some people automatically rule out Christians as stupid idiots because we supposedly don't believe the simple evidence of microevolution. But our problem isn't with microevolution, it's with macroevolution. And I would bring up DNA and anthropic principles, try to remember some, and always go back to the gospel. That's the most important thing when we're talking to people about Christ, is to not get caught up in conversations about evolution and intelligent design. That stuff's important and necessary only if we can get to the gospel as well, to this good news that Jesus Christ has paid for our sins on the cross, and that if we repent of our sin and put our trust in Him, we will be saved. Now that concludes our episode today on the teleological argument. If you guys enjoyed what you heard today, or if you found it beneficial, please remember to rate the podcast or share it around. It all helps it reach more people. If you would like to come into the podcast and have a discussion with me if you disagree, and I'd love for that to happen, we can arrange that. I would be super keen. Feel free to reach out to me at thegarrisonpod@gmail.com or on one of my social medias. Otherwise, I will see you on the next episode of The Garrison.